Started. Welcome everyone. My name is Thomas Quinn Marabello. I'm president of the Swiss American Historical Society, and this is our second ever virtual speakers series. So thank you for joining us. We have people I know out in the West, so good morning to you. Those in the Midwest and on the East Coast, good afternoon. And those of you who are joining from Switzerland and other parts of Europe, good evening. I want to especially welcome our speaker and presenter, Padraig Rooney. In English, it would be Patrick. And he is the author of Rebel Angel, The Life and Times of Annemarie Schwarzenbach. Padraig is also a member of the Swiss American Historical Society, and we are appreciative of him giving up his evening, this Sunday evening, to speak to everyone and tell us a little bit more about Annemarie Schwarzenbach and the book, and we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. I'm going to start in with a question and let Padraig sort of go from there. And what I wanted to ask is, what got you interested in Annemarie Schwarzenbach, and why did you decide to write this book?
Thank you, Tom, for that introduction and for hosting me and my book this evening. Annemarie Schwarzenbach, I think I first came across her when I was researching my previous book, which was called The Gilded Chalet. And it had a chapter about Swiss travel writers, of which there are many. And I grouped together Ella Maya and Annemarie Schwarzenbach because both of them had traveled extensively, and they had traveled together indeed at the end of towards the end of Anne-Marie's life. And so that allowed me to research her papers, which are in the Swiss Literary Archives in Bern. And I spent some time there and realized that there was a wealth of unpublished stuff, at least unpublished in English, and that she had visited the United States 3 times. And so, and had written quite a lot of journalism about the United States in the mid to late 1930s, right through to 1941, when America entered the war. So I thought that was a particularly interesting period because she was writing about an English-speaking world from a Swiss woman's point of view in the late 1930s. So that sparked the idea that I could translate her American journalism. There are about 60 or 70 articles about the United States that she wrote over a period of 3 or 4 years. And I did that, and as a subject, it didn't fly. This group of, I mean, journalism has its moment, and then it doesn't have its moment. So there wasn't much interest in a Swiss woman visiting the United States during the New Deal in the Roosevelt era. But I thought it would make a wonderful coffee table book because Annemarie was a photographer as well, and she has some wonderful photographs of that time. So that I couldn't get that to fly, but then one of the editors who replied said she had a wonderful life, a really interesting life. Why don't you write about the life? And so I sat on that for a while, and then I just did that. I followed that project and with its ups and downs. And it happened to coincide with the time of COVID, just before COVID. And so that presented its own difficulties. So that's how I got into the wonderful Annemarie.
Great. Well, I'm going to let you sort of go with your presentation that you've prepared for us, and however you want to go about that, Padraig, feel free to do your thing.
Okay. Well, let me talk a little bit about who Annemarie was, because I'm not quite sure if people know that. People who spend time in Switzerland, of course, will know something about her. But she's very much a figure from the 1920s and the 1930s between the wars. And she was born in 1908, I think it was. One of the things I find about books is that once a year or two goes by, you forget the details and you forget the dates and the names. But I think that's correct, 1908. And she was born in Zurich into a very wealthy family and quite famous family in Switzerland, really, at this stage. But famous because of Annemarie, but also famous because of some of the right-wing members of that family, the Schwarzenbach family, who had an enormous wealth derived from the silk industry. Zurich was a great Switzerland and the Zurich area around the lake were silk producing, had lots of silk producing factories in the mid to late 19th century. So she was born into that wealth, and she was born with really attractive looks and intelligence and a kind of renown, really, that developed over the 1930s. And she became interested in writing early. When she finished her doctorate at Zurich University, writing was really what she wanted to do, which of course is not really what her family wanted her to do. So that theme of conflict with her family, in particular with her mother, Renee, runs through her whole life, really. Um, as you can see, she was immensely attractive, and that I think opened quite a few doors for her early on. Her mother, Renee, was a formidable sort of figure, um, bisexual, if not lesbian, difficult to determine that. And so Renee knew early on that her daughter was also lesbian. And so there was a kind of tug of war between the two generations and the two women, and a sort of complicity, but also a struggle between them because Renee, the mother, was very conservative, uh, domineering. When Hitler came, well before Hitler came to power, she was a supporter of the National Socialists in Germany, and so of right-wing views, whereas her daughter um, became friendly with the Mann family, the Thomas Mann family, and the Mann's two children, Klaus and Erika, both of whom were gay. And they spent time together in Berlin. So already Annemarie was constructing a life where um, it was left-wing politics that interested her at a time when Berlin was a fairly decadent city. It was not so much sexual politics that interested her, but the whole life of discovering oneself as a young, attractive lesbian in the Berlin of the 1930s, together with um, developing an interest in photography, in writing, in journalism, and in travel. Those were her areas of interest. I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I'm not quite sure. Um, tell me when our time is going to be up, Tom, because I know I've got about 40 minutes. But I wanted to talk a little bit about her time in the United States. She went there for the first time in 1936. Um, Working as a journalist. And she had been working as a journalist at this point for about 7 years or so. And she traveled to Spain, and she traveled in particular to Persia. And it was in Persia that she met uh, Barbara Hamilton Wright. Annemarie was married at this point to Claude Clarac, who was a French diplomat. And so she was greatly facilitated in her travels by the fact that she had a French diplomatic passport. And her husband was, Claude was gay, and Marie was gay, and I think Barbara Hamilton Wright was gay. So it was that situation in the 1930s that comes under the umbrella of lavender marriages, where gay people, both lesbians and male homosexuals, used marriage as a kind of cover to get around, which I think Anne-Marie definitely did. Barbara Hamilton Wright was an American from a well-to-do family in Washington, and she had traveled to visit Claude because Claude had proposed to her at one point, and the marriage didn't, or the proposed marriage didn't pan out. I think families on both sides didn't it didn't quite see eye to eye on that. So it's interesting that he should invite his former intended to visit now that he had married Anne Marie. And so there's a kind of funny triangular relationship there going on in 1935-36 in Persia, as it was at the time, present-day Iran. Anne Marie got on very well with Barbara, and they decided that they would do some journalistic work together in the United States. Barbara invited her over, and she traveled to the United States, not for the very first, she traveled as a child to the United States, probably for 10 days, I think, when she graduated from school. But so it was technically her second visit to America. And she arrived in Washington at the invitation of Barbara Hamilton Wright. Ironically, Hamilton Wright was the daughter of the Washburn family on her mother's side, and her father had been an anti-drugs crusader in Washington in the fight against Chinese opium. So there's a kind of irony in the fact that Anne-Marie by this point was a fairly serious morphine addict, that the person they'd invited into the house was herself a morphine addict. She has some wonderful writings about Washington, where she goes traveling around not the current airport, but the former airport, where apparently cocaine was available in 1937, and there were all sorts of shenanigans out by the airport. So she definitely she liked to explore the underworld of cities rather than the surface as it was presented to her. So their first joint venture, Barbara and Anne-Marie, was to Pittsburgh, where there was a general strike, I think a General Motors strike. We're talking January 1937. And so she had become a kind of labor journalist at this point. She liked to write about strikes, about labor politics, about the New Deal. Roosevelt's second term, I think it was, or third term, I'm not quite sure, was coming up in November of that year, second term, I think. Maybe somebody will correct me on that, because at that time, interestingly, I think American presidents could go for 3 terms. Don't quote me on that, but I think Roosevelt did go for 3 terms, and his New Deal was in place. And so labor politics was of the moment with this strike, and America was recovering from the Depression. So she reported on labor politics in Pittsburgh with the General Motors strike, miners, mining, and on voting in Maine, and on the election itself, which took place in November of 1936, I think it was. That's Anne-Marie there at the airport. Striking figure. Um, So I do wonder what the American public made of her. She was trilingual. She German was the language at home. She spoke really good French. She had quite good English and had ideas that she might develop as an English language writer, or at least get some of her material into the American press, which never quite panned out. So on the surface, that was her behavior. And then underneath that, uh, she kept having these difficult kind of triangular relationships with women who were already married. And then underneath that, there was her addiction to morphine. And so um, when she wasn't working, she was in and out of Swiss clinics under treatment for her morphine addiction. That's Barbara. So again, striking figure. That's a photograph taken by Anne-Marie herself, and so strikingly boyish. And so these two decided then that they would head off into the South and report on issues of race, labor, the New Deal, and conditions in the southern United States. So that was the second trip they took, and I wanted maybe to read a little bit from the book about that second trip. So this is from the chapter Two Women of Ford and Rolleiflex. Barbara was working for the Ron Stryker, I think it was, a photo a group of photographers in the 1930s. So she also was taking photographs. Anne-Marie had contracts with a large number of Swiss newspapers and magazines to send back material. So that's how they put together this 3 or 4 week trip, circular trip from Washington down to Knoxville into Georgia, into Alabama, up through the Carolinas and back to Washington again. So I'll just read a little bit from that chapter. The Schwarzenbach name had for decades been associated with silk in the mill towns of Pennsylvania and the factories of Hoboken. Labor at the looms was mostly female and non-unionized. The Depression had tightened silk belts and brought home the fragile balancing act between capital and manpower. By the time Anne-Marie visited the United States in the late summer of 1936, her writing had begun to focus on the social conditions of workers, on exploitation in factories, mines, and lumber mills. For a boss's daughter, she pulled few punches. And this is from one of her earlier articles about America, describing America as success went hand in glove with ruthlessness, and the Puritan mind saw to it that this was pleasing to the Almighty. To become rich, therefore, took on a moral dimension, a cruel irony if we recall the origins of some of America's greatest fortunes. Despite everything, the survival of the fittest held sway. She left for the United States from Le Havre on the 26th of August. Klaus and Erika, that's the man, children weren't far behind on board the Statendam from Rotterdam. During the president's first term, his New Deal had attempted to lift the country out of the worst of the Depression, shoring up ordinary Americans against the predations of business and financial monopoly, speculation, and reckless banking. Roosevelt understood that when times are tough, employers double down and empathy is in short supply. 8 million Americans, however, were still without jobs, and labor unrest had led to strikes. Roosevelt had supported the Wagner Act of 1935, guaranteeing the right to unions and collective bargaining, and the Social Security Act, which provided relief for the unemployed. America was voting for the unemployed. America was voting along its perennial fault line, democratic solidarity, confronting Republican individualism, mild socialism versus laissez-faire capitalism. So we can see from that that not much has changed. So they headed south. They stopped off in Knoxville, Tennessee, where the Hoover Dam had just been built, which was one of the major New Deal construction projects. They also went to Miles Horton's kind of socialist collective. And this is where this photograph was taken of Barbara talking to one of the mill workers uh, who had joined Miles Horton. Miles Horton was a kind of activist of the 1930s, and his school is now a museum, but very much involved right through into the civil rights in the 1960s. One of the photographs that Annemarie took of kids on the boat to the United States. So we're talking about 1936. So refugees were already making their way from Germany to the United States, Jewish refugees in particular, following 3 years at that point of Nazi politics towards socialists, communists, and Jews at that point. This is a photograph taken in Knoxville. Again, she was a really wonderful photographer. I think she didn't think of herself as an art photographer, or indeed as a kind of photographer of social record, but her photographs have have come to seem so. She just thought of herself as a journalist, really, and snapped away. And so some of them are technically weak, but some of them are really wonderful portraits of people. They're available on Wikipedia, and you can go and have a look at them if you Google Annemarie Schwarzenbach Wikimedia, and they will all come up nicely arranged for you. But these are she stayed in the Howard Johnson Hotel, I think it was in Knoxville, and went down to Front Street, which is a kind of slum area fronting the river, until a policeman told her to get back to the hotel. So she didn't like the idea of a single Swiss lady hanging around the slums by the river. This was a photograph taken in Alabama, I think, of street workers in front of the Capitol in Alabama. And that's Miles Horton, a very young Miles Horton in his 30s, I think. She has a wonderful description of a picnic they went on, and where they met some mill workers who had been blacklisted, and so were sort of on the run. There was a fashion at the time for these aviator hats or aviation hats, and so these are kids again. I think this is in Georgia somewhere. Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit about her view of America at the time. from, see if I can get out of this and uh, 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 where is it? I wanted to read a little bit from her article, Democracy in the, oh, here we go, it's up here. Her view of democracy. And if you can see the screen, there we go. You can read along with me. This is an article she published in Swiss papers around 1939. And what I like about it is the way it kind of bounces back towards uh, America as it is now. And it's from an article called Democracy Viewed from the New America. Americans believed, I kid you not, that their country was the best, their institutions the most enlightened, and that morally and materially the US was superior to all other nations. They saw their country not only as the best governed, but also the richest on earth. The only serious worry had to do with the question of ethnicity. The old Anglo-Scottish rootstock, Protestant for the most part, having easily assimilated, even warmly welcomed new German, Scandinavian, and Dutch arrivals, now had to contend with a wave of Irish, Polish, Russian, Jewish, Italian, and Balkan immigrants during the years 1880 to 1890. These, as quickly became apparent, did not easily fall into the melting pot. Strenuously supported by the Catholic Church, such peoples, together with a growing number of blacks, threatened to fundamentally transform the ethnic mix of North America. Puritans, bankers, and businessmen of New England, the Boston Brahmin, Southern plantation owners who had never really recovered from the Civil War, all asked themselves with dread, what's to become of America, which in their minds was the old WASP mother country blueprint. Even today, this demographic constitutes a world apart, a conservative, intolerant minority hanging on to its self-serving views. But things change in America and quickly. And indeed they do. And so we can see that that view, that kind of ethnic view of who the good immigrants are and who the bad immigrants are is still alive and well today. The second piece I'd like to read to you is when she visited Georgia. And she didn't name the city, but it was Columbus, Georgia. And I had the great pleasure of being in Columbus in October, um, which is where Carson McCullers comes from. And so Anne-Marie visited there before she met Carson. And she came kind of face to face with the kind of genteel Southern plantocracy, the genteel Southerners. And in particular, she was shown around the textile mills by William Clark Bradley. And so this is what she wrote about her visit to Columbus, Georgia, and quoting, in this case, William Clark Bradley. We have the best and the most up-to-date methods of saving manpower and increasing production, boasted Mr. William Clark Bradley, owner of several cotton mills, shareholder and chairman of the board of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola comes from apparently was invented in Columbus, Georgia, although um, Atlanta also claims it. Industry, big shot in the town where I was visiting. We have introduced so-called performance enhancement, such as the BEDO system. This allows us to mathematically calculate the productivity per minute of our workers. We can set minute units of 60 points and ratchet up these quotas to the highest limit of human performance. Nonetheless, he went on, we are facing a new crisis right now, or we are already in the thick of it. So why are all the factories working day and night applying the Bedo system? I asked, affecting the naive poker face of the foreigner. Because of the competition, Bradley replied with a straight face. And what about the workers? I grew cheeky. They will get unemployment benefits and we will be ruined by taxes. That's how it works these days. Prosperity, competition, saving on manpower, performance targets, speedy efficiency, full warehouses, low demand, drop in prices, fresh crisis. I wanted to ask if there was something fundamentally wrong with this merry-go-round, but the lady accompanying me grabbed me by the elbow and we left. Outside in the hall, she whispered, "Isn't he a lovely man? I'm so pleased that you had the opportunity to meet John. Otherwise, you would have gotten the wrong impression of our city. But you shouldn't have brought up the workers. He's had so much trouble with them. People should be happy that they're earning anything at all these days. But they're ruined by these government handouts." She was president of the Daughters of the American Revolution and of the local chapter of a charity society, together with the Georgia Patriots and the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America. Her husband was a district judge, her brother chief of police, her brother-in-law on the roads department and the Board of Health. Her uncle had been a senator and in his hale 70s took on the mantle of head of family, stepping into the shoes of their blessed father who had held the rank of captain in the Civil War. Over the previous 3 days, I managed to learn the saga off by heart. From this and many similarly ramified family chronicles, I was able to piece together the patchwork quilt of the city and its hinterlands, plantation, and manufacturing class. The threads of politics and administration, legislation, law and order, social life and good behavior, trade and industry, prison, judicial, postal, newspaper, and welfare systems were completely stitched up. The state of Georgia and its political class were woven from such threads. I understood now why the line between state governance in the South and federal government in Washington was being described as America's greatest problem. This problem ran in the blood of the interrelated patrician families in every one of the southern states. So as you can see from that, she was fairly hard hitting in her journalism. How are we for time? Okay, we've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to move now to her third visit to the United States, which was a tragic one, because as I said, she was a morphine addict in and out of institutions in Switzerland. And she had just come back from traveling to Afghanistan with Ella Maillard. And so we were in 1939. War had broken out in Europe, but America had yet to enter the war. And she traveled to New York and stayed at the Bedford Hotel, where a lot of German exiles were billeted at this point, including her friends Klaus and Erika Mann. And it was there that she met Carson McCullers. You can see on her screen. Carson was a young Southern writer whose first book had just garnered her a prize and had become a bestseller, and she was in New York. And Carson was from Columbus, Georgia. Anne-Marie was traveling with Margot von Opel at this point, who was um, the wife of Fritz von Opel, known as Rocket Fritz. Those of you of a certain age might remember Opel cars. And so he inherited that fortune. And so he traveled strangely, he traveled separately to the United States, but was taken off the steamer at Gibraltar by the British Secret Service and interrogated for several days. So as a German holding a Liechtenstein passport, both of them, he and his wife, both held Liechtenstein passports, and somebody who was interested in rocket science, MI5 were interested in him, and eventually, when they immensely wealthy, they traveled to the United States. They were interned for the duration of the war by the FBI, and one of the wonderful sets of documents I came across in Zurich was the a kind of transcript of the FBI files on the von Opels in which Anne-Marie is mentioned. So at the Bedford Hotel, she met Carson McCullers, and at this point, her relationship to Margot von Opel was beginning to fall apart. I think Benzedrine was the drug of choice at the time. There was a good deal of alcohol. And as far as I can tell, she was off the morphine at this stage, but other drugs had taken their place. And so I wanted to read a little bit about that last visit where she broke down and was interned in Bellevue and in 3 clinics in New York and in New York State. And eventually, through a plea deal, she left. She made an arrangement had to be made with the American government whereby she could leave the institution that she was incarcerated in, it's placed in White Plains, if she agreed to get on the ship and go and never return to the United States, which was arranged. Okay, just to end on this little quotation from the chapter called Running on Empty. We're in 1941. America is about to enter the war. Anne-Marie has been through arrested by police and put in a mental institution from which she escaped, and then she was sent to an institute up in White Plains. She escaped from that and turned up at Freddie Volkenberg's flat in New York City, strung out, and eventually deported with the help of her brothers. So this is from a chapter called Running on Empty. Responsibility and blame get apportioned more neatly in retrospect than in the heat of the crisis. 4 psychiatric clinics, 2 suicide attempts, and a writer falling apart because a love affair slips out of her grasp. It can't have been easy for all concerned. Mental illness, she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia in Switzerland. Mental illness compounded by alcohol and drugs, sleeping pills, Benzedrine, but not, apparently, morphine, were the culprits. Anne-Marie's poor compliance had always made her a difficult patient. Socially needy, willful, inclined to self-righteousness and the princess manner. There was a war on, it was Christmas, and her father had died. By all accounts, she was not allayed by a fireside chat and a turkey sandwich. Margot had retreated, licking her wounds, to sunny California. Anne-Marie's brothers did what they could. She acknowledged Freddie's efforts to get her out of Bellevue. 3 private clinics and a berth negotiated on the boat home through U-boat infested waters. It is too convenient to cast the brothers as inept. They too had lost a father. Her father had died at this point. had stockings to fill, babies to lull to sleep. It's always women trouble with her, wrote Freddie to Hazy. Those are the two brothers. But you should see the types of women. Disgusting. When it came to the crunch, however, the women and the gay mans made themselves scarce, and it was left to the brothers to pick up the pieces. Deep snow blanketed the East Coast in January 1941. It looked more and more likely that America would enter the war, as Roosevelt had signaled in his fireside chats. The Pittsburgh steelworkers that Annemarie had written about 4 years earlier were now smelting like there was no tomorrow. The Mann family were guests of the Roosevelts at the White House on the 26th of January. Soon they would relocate to Pacific Palisades in California. Annemarie wrote to Klaus that her only way to get out of the clinic was to be deported from the United States with no possibility of return, a plea bargain of sorts. I'm not allowed to know the date, but if you get in touch with Freddie Volkenberg, he will be able to give you details, day, ship, etc. Carson had returned to Georgia and late in February had the first of her series of debilitating strokes and her own health to worry about. Annemarie summed up her situation in a draft note to editor Otto Kleiber. I can't shake off the feeling of being a deserter here and tend to think one should leave America to the Americans. I think I'll stop there. She left the United States on the boat, which on the return journey was picking up American refugees from Europe. The only open port in Europe was Lisbon, and from there, Annemarie traveled to the French and Belgian Congo. And 2 years later, she fell off her bicycle in Switzerland and died after 2 months of hospitalization at the age of 33, I think it was.
Thank you so much. I've got a number of questions. She's such an interesting person, and as I was reading the book and have been learning more about her, it seems striking to me that she sort of maybe was born in the wrong century. And I wonder if you can talk about that, especially the fact that she was an out lesbian, that she had these affairs and lovers, and I mean that was sort of taboo back then. So, what can you maybe say about that and how she was able to be herself and or seem to be herself in a
Mhm.
world when many people perhaps would not have done that?
She was an out lesbian, but at the same time was not particularly political about it. I mean, she never actually. I mean, in her fiction, she was one of those fiction writers who changed the gender of her characters. So a lot of her male characters are, in fact, based on women in disguise, and a lot of the heterosexual relationships in her books um, are really homosexual relationships in disguise. So there were aspects of her that were brave, of course, and audacious and all of that. But she never wrote about the position of women in Switzerland, which is kind of surprising because women in Switzerland didn't have the vote at that time. So there are anomalies in her view of some of the things that we, particularly identity politics. Identity politics, it just hadn't been invented at the time. People had, I suppose, other things to deal with. If you're dealing with Hitler and the rise of the Nazis, identity politics can seem a little bit minor, I suppose. So yes, she anticipated some of the concerns, particularly of the 80s and 90s, but I'm not quite sure that she would have totally gone in that direction. It's interesting that she was rediscovered in the 1980s by a new generation of German um, lesbians essentially, and academic lesbians who were see her as a kind of an avatar of gender politics in the late 20th and early 21st century.
I guess I was thinking not so much about her writing, but her relationships and her actions and her being very forward and um,
Yeah,
that piece, I guess, sort of struck me. And I don't know if you can comment on that or not.
which has been taken up by the Instagram generation. I mean, it's that combination of the short hair and the 1930s fashion and the good looks and the exotic travel, which has a kind of attraction to it as a package. You can see how it works visually. And so I don't know if, I mean, she was aware of the way she presented herself. That's for sure. And of casting a certain image, and she dressed in male clothes and all that kind of thing. But yeah.
The next question I had is from a quote in the book. Um, and it says, "You come to a country, Afghanistan, that has never been subjugated, neither by Alexander the Great, nor by Timur the Lame, neither by Nadir, nor by John Bull. It is the Switzerland of Asia."
Hmm.
That really sort of struck me, and I'm wondering if you can maybe expand on that. And for those who haven't read the book or don't know that Anne-Marie went to Afghanistan, she went to Turkey, she went to the Soviet Union, she went to all
Hmm.
these places that just kind of fascinating, for a single woman at the time. But what did you mean by uh, it being the Switzerland of Asia, Afghanistan?
I think it was her who made that
Uh-huh.
rather catchy phrase.
Uh-huh.
And it's to do with the fact that Afghanistan is a collection of tribes up various valleys that who have somehow made a nation, and a nation that has endured, if you like, being surrounded by the great colonial powers during what was known as the Great Game, when Russia, France, and England were um, in England in the form of India were at Afghanistan's borders. So, and a country that's able to fight off greater powers that surround it. I think she had that in mind. It's interesting. She wrote about the position of women in Afghanistan at a time when Swiss women didn't have the vote. There's ironies there that she was quite able to write about Afghani women wearing the burqa without actually addressing the position of Swiss women at home. I'm not quite sure that there was more to it than that. It's just the geographic position, the mountainous nature, and the mountains and valley nature of Afghanistan, surrounded by competing powers, just as Switzerland in the center of Europe is.
Mm-hmm. And Annemarie Schwarzenbach had a PhD in history from the University of Zurich, which is another interesting uh, fact about her. So she was an historian in addition to being a journalist and a photographer. My last question, and then want to open it up to the audience, is such an interesting person, interesting life. Has anyone approached you, or have you thought about the possibility of a documentary or maybe a Netflix series based on the book? Because I think it could be very popular.
I have indeed thought about that, and if anybody wants to approach me, please do.
Okay.
Please do. I totally agree with you. I can just see that nine-part Netflix series with all the costuming and the makeup and the cars and the glamour of people running around in the 1930s. I think it would be a winner.
Well, I know someone who's a screenwriter, and I've mentioned it to him, and so we'll see what we can do. Um, all right, great. So I'd like to now open it up to anyone who has a question for Padraig, and you could just I guess, raise your hand and unmute yourself, that would be great.
May I ask a question?
Go ahead, please.
Hi.
Padraig.
How are you? This was interesting. I have a question and a comment. A comment is, I don't know how, there must be a lot more photographs than we had a chance to look at, but I was struck by the fact that some of those you showed that were quite powerful were of children. And I ask you to comment on that. And then a question, given her time and her geographical range and so on. Did she have anything to do with Zora Neale Hurston or members of the Harlem Renaissance in New York? Or, was she at arm's length from all of these social issues, or did she actually engage, particularly with the racism that was and is a part of America? Thank you.
Yeah. Uh, on the photographs, I think there are something like 3,000 photographs up on Wikimedia, much of them landscape photographs and photographs of deserts. But she was particularly good at photographing children. It might have been something to do with being a woman photographer in countries that might not have been particularly open to single women traveling on their own or operating without cover. But she was a particularly good photographer of children.
That would be an interesting coffee table book in itself, her photographs of children. And I'm going to
Yeah,
stop. But
yeah.
the question about the Harlem Renaissance, please.
She did spend some time in New York, and visiting Harlem was in vogue then, visiting jazz bars and that kind of thing. I don't think it went much beyond that in New York, but certainly in the South. She visited, I'm trying to remember the name of the school. It was one of those early schools for Black people in the South. Something says to me Tuskegee, but I'm not quite sure. Um,
Yes, the Tuskegee Institute. Yes.
yeah, I think she visited that, but there's a curious mix in the South that she moved from hotel to well-to-do white family, and her you could maybe make the case that she was somewhat voyeuristic about Black life, both in the South and in New York. She didn't really have inroads, and she certainly in her journalism didn't quote um, representatives of the Black community in the South.
She was friends with the author uh, who wrote All Quiet on the Western Front, I believe, right? Eric.
Yeah, yeah, Eric Maria Remarque, yeah. And it strikes me now that she did review uh, Ralph, is it Ralph Ellison who wrote Invisible Man? That one of
Yes.
her reviews. Yeah, she did review that. So she was interested in Black literature, and there's um, an interesting kind of jazz theme running underneath some of her writing. When she writes about Washington, she does write about panhandlers down by the port and that kind of thing. But whether she talked to them or not, I don't think so.
Other questions?
I'm just curious, in all of these wide, broad travels, did she ever get past the East Coast of the United States? Go further west?
Well, she went to Pittsburgh, and she traveled in the south. No, she never went west.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She went as far as Maine in the north,
Mm-hmm.
and she retreated to a country club on the Hudson at one point to do some writing with Erica Mann. So there's
Where in Maine? Where did she go in Maine? I'm sitting in Maine right now.
I'm in New
Okay.
Hampshire.
She visited Barbara's home place, which um, let me. It's way up in Maine. It's a very rural area. Uh,
That's most of Maine.
Was it was it
I can't.
like
I can't quite. I can't quite recall where it was. Which where the Hamilton Wright family were based.
Was it
Hmm.
Bangor or Skowhegan? I seem to recall one of those might have been mentioned. No.
She reported on. Let me see if I can get that. She reported on early elections because at that time, men voted early. I think a month earlier because of snow or something. That be correct?
They used to vote in September. I don't know if it was because
Yeah, September. I
Oh,
think that
that's
was it.
funny.
Yeah,
but
and
We may not be voting this year at all because it's snowing.
but I remember there's a photo you have of
yeah, this is it
voting
here.
somewhere in Maine.
She wrote an article called "Paper Mills and Small Holdings in Maine,"
Oh,
and mm, 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 mm.
still despair. Yeah, that would be interesting to read. Well, I may have to read your book.
Yeah, Livermore Falls.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, it's way
Thanks.
up in the boonies. Yeah.
The Booney.
And it's the election of 1936. And I think what happened is that they voted Republican that year. I don't know how they'll vote this year.
The coast is blue.
The coast is blue, and then probably up around Livermore Falls. I did contact, there's an interpretive center in Livermore Falls about the Washburn family, and I did contact them because I was trying to find where Barbara is buried. I couldn't find her grave. Her parents are buried there, her siblings are buried there, but I couldn't find Barbara's
Hmm.
grave, and
Hmm.
yeah, they couldn't tell me.
Can I ask, these works that you've read from and that you're showing us now, are they translated or is this actually her writing?
They're translated by me.
Okay, okay.
From the German?
From German or
Yeah,
French?
from German, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Because I thought, wow, she's really a fantastic writer for her third language. But now I can see there you at the top of the article it says translated by you. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
She wrote about Princeton as well, where those Einstein and a whole bunch of famous American or German scientists were based. Einstein, Hermann Weyl, Balin, Alexander von Neumann, and they were all based in Princeton at the time. So she traveled there as well. There's about 20 of them that are worth publishing, I think. And I think that would be a really interesting book, her photographs together with different aspects of the 1930s in America. Journalism and photos together.
Well, it's a bit like de Tocqueville. I mean, travels through America at a particular time.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that she did that.
Yeah, she wrote in what's called the feuilleton style, which is a kind of a German style where you give 1,500 words on a topic, but it's not written in the Anglo-Saxon style of journalism where you interview people and quote and take a topic. It's much more poetic. So some of them fly in English and some of them seem a bit indulgent, particularly when she doesn't quote people. It's not that kind of journalism. But it was I mean, all writers have books that don't work, and mine was New Deal America. It's a whole bunch of writing by Annemarie, and it didn't really get off the ground.
It may in years to come.
Who knows? Who knows?
Do we have some other questions? What's maybe the most interesting thing uh, about her that you could say that maybe you learned through your research?
Um, I don't think she liked food. So it intrigues me in all her travels. We never hear of her eating. We do hear of her drinking, but so maybe it was an effect of being an addict. But I don't think she had a good relationship with food. The other thing that strikes me is that I do wonder sometimes if she hadn't died, would she have just become an ordinary middle of the road person once she moved into her 30s? Because there were signs of that before she died, that she was a little bit washed up, and that she hadn't written fiction for a while, and some of the writing she did in Morocco was a little bit dated. It struck me that when she was writing these very bejeweled, almost Orientalist articles about Morocco, that Albert Camus had just published The Outsider, which is a completely different direction in writing. So in 1941, she was writing in a somewhat already passé mode. She was strongly Orientalist, and so that had become out of date by the time she died. So I don't know if she would have necessarily been able to pick up the pieces and get a solid piece of fiction together.
What's your question? I'll ask it. What's the question?
Are there any other questions?
Go, Susan, go.
Okay, just a quick one. Did you mention that she spent approximately 2 years or a year and a half in Belgian Congo?
She spent about 7 months in the Belgian Congo. Yeah.
And what did she accomplish down there, or was she attempting to accomplish anything, or to write, or what
She
did she?
she wanted to join the Free French and travel as a journalist up to across Africa to Egypt. It was rather harebrained as an idea, because she knew that Egypt was quickly becoming one of the major fronts in the war, and it was just a couple of years later that the Americans would land in North Africa. But she seemed unaware that she was traveling on a, not unaware, but it didn't occur to her that she would be accused of being a spy, because she was traveling on a French diplomatic passport and her husband was representing Vichy France in Morocco at that time. So that compromised her to some extent, and she herself was German speaking, and her mother was a well-known Nazi sympathizer. So it wasn't the moment to present yourself in the Congo as a journalist who wanted to travel across Central Africa and work on the side of the Free French. As it turned out, she traveled upriver to a Swiss farm and spent some time there and took some wonderful photographs again, and wrote about, what did she write about? Yeah, she wrote about a little bit about the Free French, but she actually tackled her last novel for a period in the Congo, which is, I find a bit unreadable. I've tried to, it was rediscovered quite recently, and it's just a novel that doesn't work. So she was writing and taking photographs and traveling up the Congo River in the footsteps of Joseph Conrad. But
So,
because of the war was on, so because of censorship, she was probably stymied somewhat as to what she might be able to write. She certainly didn't write about race. That's the striking thing. She didn't write about colonialism and race. She thought that the war and the war effort should take precedence over that. So that was something that struck me, that when it came to the crunch, she didn't have anything to say about Belgian and French colonialism.
I know how much research you did in Switzerland. Did you travel to places like Morocco, Egypt, Belgian Congo as part of your research for this book?
Lord, no, I could barely travel around Switzerland because it was COVID times, as I said. I went to Munich, where the Mann archives are, the Mann family archives, and I went to Marbach, where there was an important collection of files belonging to one of her friends. And then there were files also in Boston that I visited. So that was the extent of my research. And then I was able to get hold of letters between Carson McCullers and Annemarie that are in Texas, I think.
So
But I
by
didn't go to Africa. No.
by the time of the beginning of the pandemic, did you already have the book contract so the clock was ticking?
No, I didn't. I was working blind.
Okay.
I was working actually between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning before I went into a homeroom. That's when most of this book was written. Getting up early and then getting into school at 8 o'clock, 8:30.
Are you still teaching?
No, I've retired from that, thank God. For a 43-year career in teaching is over.
And what did you teach?
I taught English literature for
Okay.
many years.
Secondary level?
Yeah, high school level, yeah, and some at university as well.
Wonderful. Any other questions for Padraig? Yes, go ahead.
Um, I wanted to bring a personal dimension to this book. I come
Mhm.
from Geneva, Switzerland. I was born there, and I was the next door neighbor of Ella Maillard.
Okay. Pleased to meet you.
Yeah, Ella Maillard, unlike Anne-Marie, died at the ripe old age of 94, and she was the gal with whom she went to Turkey and Afghanistan with
Mhm.
with the car and drove back.
Wow.
And she would tell us all about those stories with Anne-Marie. So I just wanted to bring that story.
Mhm.
That's really
That's
cool.
that's Ella there. Yeah, I think in front of
That's right. They were
in Geneva. That was
in
taken.
Geneva. That was the car that they started with. And but then Ella also, she died, at 94, and she
In Chondolin, up in the valley, that wonderful little museum to her memory up in the valley.
and it's the highest village lived year round in Switzerland, and she wanted to get away, away from it all. And of course, she loved the mountains. So I visited her many times up in Chondolin. So anyway, that's the story, the dimension, and maybe one day you'll expand on the role of Ella Maillard too. She was quite something.
She was quite something. Did Ella ever speak about Anne-Marie?
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, of course.
because it's that book she wrote just, I think, shortly after the war, or in 1947. The all the roads. Now, what's the name of the book that Ella wrote about their trip to Afghanistan,
Oh,
where
I
she had
have it
where
somewhere. But
she
you
had
know,
to disguise her name because Renee, the mother, didn't want Anna Marie's real name in the book, and she had to disguise her as Christine, I think. That's quite a revealing book.
yeah.
This is great to have her.
Well, I think I think we've gone a little over what we were planning to, but this was a great conversation and overview. And Padraig Rooney, we thank you so much for your time and for spending this time with us and giving us some more insights into Annemarie Schwarzenbach and her fascinating life. And so really thank you so much. Maybe we'll see some future articles in the SAHS review from you about other aspects of her. We've published two, I believe, back in 2023, 2024. And thank you all for coming. We will be doing another virtual speaker series on Wednesday, April 15th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Dr. Jesse Cox, who is a professor of music at Harvard and has written a book called Black Sounds of Switzerland. So you're welcome to join us for that. We'll certainly send out information on social media and via email. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. And feel free to, if you're not a member or you're not familiar with us, look us up. We have a website. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. And actually, this session is being recorded, and we'll eventually get it up on our YouTube channel for anyone who wasn't able to come to watch it. And so thank you again, Padraig. Really appreciate this. And cheers to everyone. And thank you again. Take care.
You signing out from the south of France.
Enjoy. Take care, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.